Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been doing a buddy read of Stephen King's 2008 novel, Duma Key, with my good friend Renee at Beyond Books, and we agreed that we would both review the book today. First, I will say that I absolutely loved the experience of reading and talking about this novel with Renee. We shared our thoughts through emails over the past 2 weeks, and it was just a thoroughly enjoyable experience of sharing our impressions. I think we both enjoyed a good part of this book, but ultimately, at least from our last discussion, I think I can say that we were both disappointed. And you'll hear more about what Renee thought about it in her video today also. For me, the first 2/3 of the book worked really well, and then the last third just didn't entirely work for me. There were aspects of this novel, which I'm going to discuss, that I absolutely loved, but the way that King wrapped up the narrative and resolved all of the conflicts in the story was not ultimately satisfying to me. And that's too bad, because there's much about this novel that was really promising. This 2008 novel is the first that King set in Florida. This is the story of Edgar Freemantle, a man who moves from Minnesota to the Florida Keys after a catastrophic, life-altering event. Edgar Freemantle is our protagonist and our first-person narrator. He's an extremely likable character. A horrible construction accident has left him with a traumatic brain injury, impaired language, memory loss, and the loss of his right arm. In the aftermath of the accident, he also loses his marriage. Edgar Freemantle is an incredibly resilient character. While his physical pain remains fairly constant through much of the novel, including pain in the phantom limb that he has lost, his language skills and his memory do begin to improve on Duma Key, largely through his dedication to art and to his relationships that he forms with a couple of other residents, which I'm going to be discussing. Initially, he takes to art as a form of therapy, but eventually his paintings begin to turn very weird and haunting. Edgar develops a friendship with a neighbor, one Jerome Wireman, who is the caretaker next door of Elizabeth Eastlake, a 90-year-old woman suffering from dementia, who also happens to own the house that Edgar is renting. Edgar learns that Elizabeth, too, began drawing as a child, and we eventually learn that she began drawing after she also suffered a traumatic brain injury. As we get to know the characters, we eventually discover that both Edgar's and Elizabeth's art feature some of the same horrible imagery. As their narratives converge, Edgar learns of the horror surrounding everyone on Duma Key. Edgar's therapeutic art soon becomes anything but therapeutic when an evil force, the chief antagonist of the story, a supernatural creature known as Percy, soon begins to speak through Edgar's art. This force begins to threaten all of Edgar's friends and loved ones. King draws absolutely wonderful characters in this novel, and one of the things that I liked the most about Duma Key was the depiction of really strong relationships among the main characters. King does a brilliant job of developing these characters and of showing the deep and very human relationships they form. Edgar with his neighbor Wireman, who is the attendant to Elizabeth Eastlake, Edgar with his younger daughter Ilsa, and even Edgar with the 90-year-old Elizabeth Eastlake. Elizabeth Eastlake is in the throes of dementia, but she has moments of great lucidity as she nears the end of her life. There are many parallels between her and Edgar. She, too, suffered a traumatic brain injury, but hers occurred in childhood. Like Edgar, she also developed the ability to draw after this injury. And in the present tense of the novel, because of her increasing dementia, she too has difficulty at times accessing memory and speech. Jerome Wireman, a man in his 40s who takes care of Elizabeth, becomes a best friend to Edgar. Wireman, too, has a deeply troubled and traumatic past, having experienced profound tragedy and loss in his own family. He also has very dramatic physical limitations as a result of his traumatic past. The relationships among the main characters are my very favorite part of this book. I think the greatest strength of the novel was the theme of the restorative power of human relationships. I absolutely loved these characters and how they all grew stronger and healthier through their relationships with one another. Wireman begins to heal from his unimaginable losses through the act of caring for Elizabeth Eastlake. He even says of Elizabeth that she helped him find his heart when he thought his heart was gone. Edgar, too, begins to recover from the devastating effects not only of the accident, but also of his rage over what has happened to him through his relationships with Wireman and Elizabeth, and also through his relationship with his youngest daughter, Ilsa. These life-giving relationships were the best part of the novel, and I would recommend the novel on the basis of the relationships alone. I thought the novel also dealt very thoughtfully and sensitively with issues of body disfigurement and brain injury, memory loss, loss of language, loss of sight, loss of the ability to control one's body. So there is a very real horror in the situations of all of the main characters, even without the supernatural elements of the story. I also loved the themes surrounding art in the novel. For much of the novel, we see the therapeutic aspects of creating art in the lives of both Edgar and Elizabeth. Edgar goes from thinking of art as a new hobby to an absolutely essential part of his return to health. He also discovers strange restorative powers in his art, where he is literally able to alter life around him through his art. For example, he is able to restore Wireman's health at one point by painting a portrait of Wireman pre-injury. The novel also explores some strange, dangerous aspects of art, and this is where I think the novel really goes astray. Both Elizabeth and Edgar begin to draw and paint horrifying scenes as some demonic force begins to work through them, through their artwork, to bring about unimaginable calamity. I was absolutely entranced by the supernatural aspects of their talents early on in the novel, much like I felt about the supernatural abilities of John Coffey in Stephen King's novel, The Green Mile, a book that I used to teach to seniors in high school. But then suddenly, in Duma Key, the artistic talents become the source of genuine horror and real malevolence as this force begins to work through their artwork. And suddenly I felt like Stephen King was writing an entirely different novel. The antagonist in the novel is an ancient, malevolent entity named Percy, and she's described as being hungry for souls. She's pure sadistic evil who thrives on human sorrow and suffering. Our description of her comes to us piecemeal through the last third of the novel, but we eventually learn that she has very pale skin, reddish hair, a third eye in her forehead, and too many teeth to fit into her mouth. She's often described as wearing a long red robe. She also lures souls to her ship, and her ship is called the Persephone. This is a ship of the dead. She works through gifted artists like Elizabeth and Edgar, whom she tempts with the ability to make the things that they draw or paint come to life. She's a source of absolutely irredeemable evil, but we're never really given any explanation for her existence or any real motivation for the things that she does, or if we are, it completely escaped me. There was plenty of supernatural material in the novel without her. I felt like the entire narrative went off the rails in the last third of the novel when the pursuit of this demonic creature became the focal point of the story. It felt, like I said, like we were reading an entirely different book from the one we had been reading for the first 400 pages or so. Along with my disappointment with King's decision to make the story's antagonist this irredeemable and inexplicable source of evil, I was also unhappy with his employment of the symbolism of dolls in the story. There are several dolls used in the story. There's Reba, the anger management doll. There's a porcelain doll that Percy uses to manipulate the young Elizabeth. And there's Novine, a rag doll that once belonged to the young Elizabeth, but that takes on a super powerful role in the resolution of the plot. Creepy dolls are certainly a common horror trope. It felt overused in this novel, and ultimately, by the time Novine comes into the story, it seemed almost silly. So I struggled with the final third of this novel and with the motivation for the source of evil in the narrative. I think that this may be one of those books that people who have read a lot more Stephen King than I have, one of those books that people talk about when they say that King doesn't always end his novels well. The setting was really wonderful. The main characters, I thought, were brilliantly drawn. and very sympathetic characters also. And the relationships among them propelled the narrative forward. The importance of art in the novel was also really intriguing. Even the supernatural twining of the stories of Edgar and Elizabeth was very well done. It was just the giving over of the story to this malevolent agent that made me feel like I had fallen into a different novel from the one I had been reading for the first 400 pages. I still think the book is worth reading, especially for the characters and their relationships and the setting. It's just that the final third didn't live up to my expectations from the first 2/3. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.